Welcome to Dark Creaky TV. If you're new here, be sure to subscribe for the best Reddit creepypasta stories, perfect for bedtime chills. We'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to leave a comment. Thank you for joining us and enjoy the story. I never thought I'd be the kind of person to dig up a grave. Growing up, I was always the cautious kid, the one who followed rules and kept to myself. But sometimes, life throws you down a path you never anticipated. And that's how I ended up in the mountains, in the dead of night, with a shovel in my hands. It all started when I was doing some research for a history project. My town has a rich past, filled with legends and ghost stories. One story in particular caught my attention, the tale of the old graveyard in the mountains. According to the locals, it was abandoned over a century ago, and many believed it was haunted. The more I read about it, the more obsessed I became. There were whispers of strange rituals and unmarked graves, and I felt an inexplicable pull to uncover the truth. I mentioned the graveyard to my friend Jake, who shared my fascination with the macabre. He was all in when I suggested we check it out. So, one Saturday night, we packed our bags with flashlights, snacks, and a couple of shovels and headed into the mountains. The hike was long and grueling. The trail was barely visible, overgrown with weeds and tangled branches. By the time we reached the graveyard, it was nearly midnight. The air was cold, and a thick fog had settled over the area, making it even more eerie. The graveyard was exactly as I'd imagined, rows of crumbling headstones, some tipped over and others covered in moss. There was an oppressive silence, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves. We wandered around for a while, reading the inscriptions on the headstones. Most were too worn to make out, but a few had dates from the 1800s. Jake and I split up to cover more ground. As I walked, my flashlight beam caught something strange. It was a gravestone, larger than the others, with a strange symbol carved into it. It looked like a combination of a pentagram and some kind of runic inscription. My heart raced as I realized this was it, the grave I had been looking for. I called Jake over and we decided to dig it up. It felt wrong, like we were crossing a line we couldn't uncross, but the curiosity was too strong. We took turns with the shovel, the sound of metal scraping against dirt echoing in the night. After what felt like hours, we finally hit something solid. My hands trembled as we cleared the remaining dirt, revealing a wooden coffin. Jake pried it open with the shovel, and we both recoiled at the sight. Inside, there was no body, just a collection of bizarre items. An old, weathered Ouija board lay on top of a pile of bones, clearly feline. There was also a rusty knife and a bowl, stained with what looked like dried blood. My mind raced as I tried to piece together what we were seeing. These weren't just random objects. They were tools for some kind of ritual. "Dude, we should get out of here," Jake said, his voice shaking. But I was too entranced by the discovery. I reached out and picked up the Ouija board. It felt strangely warm, almost alive. As I held it, I felt a sudden, intense pressure in my chest, like something was squeezing my heart. I gasped for air and dropped the board, stumbling backward. "What the hell?" Jake yelled, grabbing my arm. "Are you okay?" I nodded, but the truth was, I wasn't sure. Something about this place, this grave, felt wrong on a fundamental level. We quickly covered the grave back up, placing the items back inside the coffin. But the damage was done. As we made our way back down the mountain, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had awakened something that was now following us. That night, I had the most vivid nightmares I'd ever experienced. I dreamt of shadowy figures chanting in a language I couldn't understand. They were standing around the grave, performing some kind of dark ritual. I woke up in a cold sweat, my heart pounding. The images from the dream were burned into my mind. The following days were a blur. I felt like I was being watched, and every night the nightmares grew worse. I tried to focus on school and normal life, but the memories of that night haunted me. I didn't tell anyone, not even Jake, who seemed to be dealing with his own demons. One afternoon, as I was walking home from school, I saw something that made my blood run cold. On my front porch, there was a small, neatly wrapped package. My name was written on it in a shaky, unfamiliar handwriting. I opened it with trembling hands, revealing the Ouija board we had buried in the mountains. My breath caught in my throat, and I dropped the package, stumbling backward. How had it found its way to me? I called Jake immediately, but he didn't answer. Panic set in as I realized I had no idea what to do. The board felt like a curse, a reminder of the grave we should never have disturbed. As night fell, the oppressive feeling grew stronger, and I knew I couldn't face it alone. I drove to Jake's house, hoping he could help me figure out what was happening. But when I arrived, his mum answered the door, her face pale and drawn. She told me Jake had been acting strangely ever since our trip to the mountains. He had been having nightmares too, and had become increasingly paranoid. I found Jake in his room, sitting in the dark. He looked up at me with hollow eyes, his face gaunt and shadowed. "It followed us," he whispered. "We have to fix this." We spent the night researching everything we could about the items we found. It became clear that they were part of a ritual, something meant to summon or bind a spirit. We realized we needed to perform a counter-ritual to undo whatever we had unleashed. As the clock struck midnight, we gathered the items and drove back to the graveyard. The fog was thicker this time, and the air felt electric. We dug up the grave again and set the items in a circle, following the instructions we had found. My hands shook as I recited the incantation, the words foreign and sinister. The ground began to tremble, and a cold wind whipped around us. Suddenly, a shadowy figure rose from the grave, its eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. It let out a blood-curdling scream, and I felt a searing pain in my chest. I dropped to my knees, gasping for breath, as the figure loomed over us. Jake grabbed the knife and slashed at the figure, but it passed through like smoke. Desperation filled his eyes as he realized we were in over our heads. The figure reached out, and I felt its icy grip around my throat. Darkness closed in, and I thought this was the end. But then, just as quickly as it had appeared, the figure vanished. The wind died down, and the fog lifted. We were left in stunned silence, the graveyard eerily quiet once more. We quickly buried the items again and fled the mountains, vowing never to speak of what had happened. But even now, I can't escape the feeling that something is still watching, waiting for the right moment to return. The nightmares persist, and the Ouija board still haunts my dreams. We may have survived that night, but I fear the true horror is yet to come. It's been a week since Jake and I performed the counter-ritual, but the sense of dread hasn't left me. If anything, it's grown stronger. Every shadow seems darker, every whisper louder. I've tried to resume my normal routine, but nothing feels normal anymore. The nightmares are relentless, and I'm starting to feel like I'm losing my mind. I haven't seen Jake since that night. He's been avoiding my calls and messages, which is unlike him. His mum said he's been spending most of his time locked in his room. I decide to visit him again, hoping to find some answers. When I arrive at his house, his mum gives me a worried look. "He's been acting really strange," she says. "I'm glad you're here. Maybe you can get through to him." I knock on Jake's door, and after a long pause, he finally lets me in. The room is dark, the curtains drawn tight. Jake looks worse than before. His skin is pale, and there are dark circles under his eyes. "We need to talk," I say, trying to keep my voice steady. Jake nods and gestures for me to sit. "I've been doing more research," he begins. "I think what we did was only part of the ritual. There's more to it, and I think we need to finish it if we want to be free." He shows me a notebook filled with scribbled notes and diagrams. It's clear he hasn't slept in days. "I found references to an ancient binding ritual," he continues. "We need to find the spirit's true name and bind it properly. Otherwise, it will keep haunting us." As he explains, I feel a chill run down my spine. The idea of confronting the spirit again terrifies me, but it's clear we have no other choice. "How do we find its name?" I ask. "There's a medium in town," Jake says. "Her name is Eliza. She might be able to help us, but we need to be careful. This spirit is dangerous, and it won't give up easily." We decide to visit Eliza the next day. She lives on the outskirts of town in an old, weathered house. As we approach, I can feel the air grow colder. Jake knocks on the door, and a woman in her 60s answers. Her eyes are sharp, and there's an air of authority about her. "We need your help," Jake says. "We've been haunted by a spirit, and we think you can help us find its name." Eliza studies us for a moment before nodding. "Come in," she says, leading us into a dimly lit room filled with candles and strange artifacts. "Tell me everything." We recount the events of the past week, and she listens intently. When we're done, she nods thoughtfully. "You've disturbed a powerful spirit," she says, "but there is a way to bind it. I'll need to perform a séance to communicate with it and learn its name." Eliza sets up the séance, lighting candles and arranging them in a circle. She instructs us to sit and hold hands. "Whatever happens, do not break the circle," she warns. "The spirit will try to deceive you." She begins chanting in a low melodic voice. The temperature drops and the air feels thick and heavy. Suddenly the candles flicker and a cold wind sweeps through the room. I hear a faint whispering, growing louder and more insistent. Eliza's voice rises and the room feels like it's closing in on us. Then, a shadowy figure appears in the center of the circle. It's the same spirit from the graveyard, its eyes burning with an otherworldly light. Eliza continues chanting, and the spirit's form wavers, as if struggling to maintain its shape. "Tell us your name," Eliza commands. The spirit snarls, its voice a guttural growl. "You have no power here," it hisses. "You will suffer." Eliza's grip tightens on our hands, and she chants louder. The spirit's form flickers, and it lets out a piercing scream. "My name is Thalassius," it finally spits out. "But you will never bind me." With that, the spirit vanishes, and the room falls silent. Eliza slumps back, exhausted. "We have the name," she says weakly. "Now we can bind it, but be careful. Thalassius will do everything in its power to stop you." We thank Eliza and head back to Jake's house to prepare for the binding ritual. The atmosphere is tense, and I can't shake the feeling of being watched. I keep seeing shadows out of the corner of my eye, but when I turn, there's nothing there. That night, we gather the items from the grave and follow the instructions Eliza gave us. The ritual is complex, involving precise movements and incantations. As we begin, the temperature drops again, and I can feel Thalassius's presence growing stronger. The candles flicker, and the shadows in the room seem to move on their own. We recite the incantation, and I can feel the air grow thick with tension. Suddenly, the spirit appears before us, its form more solid and menacing than before. "You dare to bind me?" Thalassius snarls. "You will pay for your insolence." Ignoring the spirit's threats, we continue the ritual. The room shakes, and objects begin to fly off the shelves. Jake's voice wavers, but he doesn't stop. I can feel the spirit's anger, a palpable force pressing down on us. Finally, we reach the climax of the ritual. We call out Thalassius's name and command it to be bound. The spirit lets out an ear-piercing scream, and I feel a surge of energy as the binding takes hold. The room falls silent, and Thalassius's form dissolves into smoke. The oppressive feeling lifts, and I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. We've done it. We've bound the spirit. But as we clean up the ritual items, I can't shake the feeling that this isn't over. The nightmares continue, and I still feel like I'm being watched. Thalassius may be bound, but its presence lingers, a dark shadow over my life. I don't know what the future holds, but I do know one thing. I'll never be the same. The graveyard in the mountains changed me, and the darkness we uncovered will haunt me forever. Binding Thalassius gave us a brief sense of relief, but it was short-lived. The nightmares didn't stop, and the sense of being watched only intensified. It felt as if Thalassius was lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. Jake and I became more withdrawn, consumed by our fear and paranoia. A week after the binding ritual, I woke up to find strange symbols etched into my bedroom walls. They were similar to the runes we had seen on the gravestone, and they pulsed with a faint, eerie light. Panic surged through me, and I immediately called Jake. "Have you seen anything weird?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Jake was silent for a moment before he spoke. "Yeah, the same symbols. They're everywhere in my house. I don't know what to do. We agreed to meet at Jake's house to figure out our next steps. When I arrived, the atmosphere was even more oppressive than before. The symbols were etched into every surface, and I could feel a malevolent presence lurking in the air. "We need to contact Eliza again," Jake said, his voice trembling. "Maybe she can help us understand what's happening." We drove to Eliza's house, hoping she could provide some answers. When we arrived, she greeted us with a concerned look. "I sensed something was wrong," she said, leading us inside. We explained the symbols and the lingering presence of Thalassius. Eliza listened intently, her expression growing more serious. "The binding ritual should have worked," she said, frowning. "But it seems Thalassius is stronger than we anticipated. There's more to this spirit than we realized." She examined the symbols and nodded grimly. "These are summoning runes," she explained. "Someone, or something, is trying to summon Thalassius back. We need to find out who's behind this and stop them." Eliza suggested we return to the graveyard to look for clues. She believed there might be more hidden secrets that could help us understand Thalassius's power. Despite our fear, Jake and I agreed. We couldn't keep living in this nightmare. The hike to the graveyard was even more daunting this time. The fog was thicker, and the air felt charged with electricity. As we approached the graveyard, a sense of foreboding washed over me. It was as if the very ground was warning us to turn back. We split up to search the area, carefully examining each gravestone and clearing away the overgrown weeds. After an hour of searching, Jake called out to me, "Over here! I found something!" I hurried over to find Jake standing in front of an old, weathered mausoleum. The door was slightly ajar, and strange symbols were etched into the stone. Eliza joined us, her eyes narrowing as she studied the symbols. "This is it," she said. "The source of Thalassius's power is inside." We pushed open the heavy door and stepped inside. The air was cold and musty, and the only light came from our flashlights. As we moved deeper into the mausoleum, we found a hidden chamber filled with ancient artifacts. In the center of the room was an altar, and on it lay a dusty old book. Eliza carefully opened the book, her eyes scanning the pages. "This is a grimoire," she explained. "It contains spells and rituals, including the one to summon Thalassius. Whoever used this book must have performed the original summoning ritual." As she flipped through the pages, Eliza's expression grew more alarmed. "There's another ritual here," she said, her voice tense. "A ritual to release Thalassius completely. If someone completes this ritual, Thalassius will be free to wreak havoc on our world." The gravity of the situation hit me like a punch to the gut. We had to stop whoever was behind this, or we'd face something far worse than we'd ever imagined. "What do we do?" I asked, desperation creeping into my voice. Eliza looked at us, determination in her eyes. "We need to find the person who's trying to summon Thalassius and stop them before it's too late. They're likely using the grimoire to perform the rituals. If we can take it away from them, we might have a chance to end this once and for all." We left the mausoleum and headed back to town, our minds racing with the enormity of the task ahead. We needed to figure out who had the grimoire and where they were hiding. As we discussed our plan, a chilling thought crossed my mind. "What if it's someone we know?" I asked. "Someone who knew we went to the graveyard and found the items?" Jake's face paled as he considered the possibility. That would make sense. Someone who wanted to use us to find the grave and perform the rituals. We decided to start our search with the people we knew who had an interest in the occult. There weren't many, but a few names came to mind. We needed to be careful though. Confronting someone who was actively summoning a powerful spirit was dangerous. As we investigated, we uncovered a disturbing pattern. A local historian, Mr. Turner, had been researching the graveyard and its legends for years. He was known for his eccentric behavior and obsession with the occult. When we visited his house, we found evidence linking him to the grimoire. Books on dark rituals, strange artifacts, and notes about Thalassius were scattered throughout his study. It was clear Mr. Turner was behind the summoning. We confronted him, and he didn't deny it. His eyes gleamed with a fanatic intensity as he explained his desire to harness Thalassius's power. "You don't understand," he said, his voice filled with conviction. "Thalassius can grant unimaginable power. I can control it. I can control everything." "You're insane," Jake spat, fear and anger mingling in his voice. "You have no idea what you're dealing with." Mr. Turner laughed, a chilling sound that sent shivers down my spine. "You're too late," he said. "The ritual is almost complete. Thalassius will be free, and there's nothing you can do to stop it." Desperation filled us as we realized we had no time to waste. We needed to stop the ritual before it was too late. With Eliza's guidance, we formulated a plan to confront Mr. Turner and disrupt the ritual. That night, we gathered the necessary items and headed to the mausoleum. The atmosphere was thick with tension, and I could feel Thalassius's presence growing stronger. As we approached the hidden chamber, we heard Mr. Turner's voice chanting the final incantations. Bursting into the room, we saw Mr. Turner standing at the altar, the grimoire open before him. His eyes widened in surprise, but he quickly regained his composure. "You're too late," he shouted, raising his hands to complete the ritual. Before he could finish, Eliza threw a handful of salt into the air, breaking the circle of power. The room erupted in chaos as Thalassius's form materialized, its eyes burning with rage. "You dare to defy me!" it roared, its voice echoing through the chamber. The ground shook, and we struggled to stay on our feet. Eliza began chanting a counterspell, her voice steady and strong. Jake and I held our ground, determined to see this through. Thalassius's form wavered, and it let out a furious scream. Mr. Turner lunged at us, desperate to finish the ritual. Jake tackled him, and they struggled on the floor. I grabbed the grimoire and began reciting the binding spell we had learned. Thalassius's form flickered, and the air grew thick with tension. With one final ear-piercing scream, Thalassius's form shattered into a million pieces, dissolving into the air. The room fell silent, and the oppressive feeling lifted. We had done it. We had stopped Thalassius. Mr. Turner lay on the ground, defeated. His eyes were filled with madness, and he muttered incoherently. We called the authorities, and he was taken away, his plans thwarted. As we left the mausoleum, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. The nightmare was finally over, but deep down, I knew that the events of the past weeks had changed me forever. The darkness we had faced would always be a part of me, a reminder of the horrors that lurk just beneath the surface of our world. Jake and I vowed to move on with our lives, but we remained vigilant. The memories of Thalassius and the graveyard in the mountains would never fade. And though the spirit was bound, we knew that true evil never really dies. It just waits, biding its time, until the next unwitting soul stumbles upon its dark secrets. After we stopped Mr. Turner and bound Thalassius, Jake and I tried to return to our normal lives. But the experiences we had endured left scars that wouldn't heal. The nightmares persisted, and the feeling of being watched never truly went away. I often found myself jumping at shadows, my nerves constantly on edge. Jake and I kept in touch, but our conversations were strained. We had shared a traumatic experience that no one else could understand, and it created a bond between us that was both comforting and unsettling. We met up occasionally to discuss our ongoing struggles, always keeping an eye out for any signs that Thalassius might return. One evening, about a month after the confrontation with Mr. Turner, Jake called me in a panic. "It's happening again," he said, his voice shaking. "The symbols are back." My heart sank. We had hoped that binding Thalassius would be the end of it, but it seemed we were wrong. I rushed over to Jake's house, dreading what I might find. When I arrived, the sight was all too familiar. The same runes we had seen before were etched into the walls, glowing faintly in the dim light. "What do we do now?" Jake asked, his eyes wide with fear. I had no answers. We had done everything Eliza instructed, but it seemed Thalassius's hold on us was stronger than we thought. "We need to talk to Eliza again," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Maybe she missed something. We drove to Eliza's house, our minds racing with worry. When we arrived, she greeted us with a look of concern. "I've been sensing disturbances," she said, leading us inside. "Tell me what's been happening." We explained the return of the symbols and the persistent feeling of dread. Eliza listened intently. her face growing more serious with every word. "Thalassius is more powerful than I realized," she said. "It seems the binding ritual wasn't enough. There must be something else anchoring it to our world." We racked our brains, trying to think of anything we might have missed. Then, a chilling thought crossed my mind. "The grave," I said. "What if there's something in the grave that's keeping Thalassius here?" Eliza nodded. "It's possible. We need to go back and investigate. If there's an anchor, we need to find it and destroy it." The thought of returning to the graveyard filled me with dread, but we had no choice. We gathered our supplies and headed back to the mountains. The hike felt even longer this time, every step weighed down by the fear of what we might find. When we reached the graveyard, the fog was thicker than ever, and the air was charged with a sense of foreboding. We made our way to the grave we had disturbed, our flashlights cutting through the darkness. The ground around the grave was still disturbed from our previous visits, and the air felt colder than it should have. We started digging, our movements slow and cautious. As we unearthed the coffin once more, I felt a chill run down my spine. There was something inherently wrong about this place, something that went beyond the presence of a restless spirit. Opening the coffin, we found the same items we had seen before: the Ouija board, the cat bones, the knife, and the bowl. But this time, there was something else. At the bottom of the coffin, hidden beneath the other items, was a small, intricately carved box. Eliza examined the box, her face pale. "This is it," she said. "This is the anchor. We need to destroy it." The box was covered in strange symbols and runes, and it pulsed with a dark energy. We carefully removed it from the coffin and set it on the ground. Eliza began chanting a spell, her voice steady and strong. The box seemed to vibrate, as if resisting her words. Suddenly, the air around us grew colder, and a shadowy figure materialized. Thalassius's eyes burned with rage as it loomed over us. "You cannot defeat me," it snarled. "I'm eternal." Eliza's chanting grew louder, and the box started to crack. Thalassius let out a furious scream, and the ground beneath us shook. I felt an intense pressure in my chest, like my heart was being squeezed. Jake and I stood our ground, determined to see this through. Eliza's voice reached a crescendo, and with a final shattering word, the box broke into pieces. Thalassius let out a blood-curdling scream, and its form dissolved into smoke. The ground stopped shaking, and the air grew still. The oppressive feeling lifted, and I could finally breathe again. We had done it. We had destroyed the anchor, and with it, Thalassius's hold on our world. As we gathered the pieces of the box, I felt a sense of closure. The nightmare was finally over. We buried the items back in the grave and covered it with earth, hoping to put the past behind us. Returning to town, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The nightmares stopped, and the feeling of being watched disappeared. Jake and I were finally free from Thalassius's curse. We tried to move on with our lives, though the memories of what we had endured would always stay with us. Eliza assured us that the spirit was truly gone this time, and I believed her. But deep down, a part of me remained vigilant. We had faced true evil, and I knew that the darkness we had encountered was only a glimpse of what lay hidden in the world. As time passed, Jake and I drifted apart, each of us dealing with the trauma in our own way, but we stayed in touch, bound by the shared experience that had forever changed us. We knew that no matter what happened, we had survived something unimaginable, and that knowledge gave us a strength we never knew we had. The graveyard in the mountains remained a place of fear and mystery, but we had faced its horrors and come out the other side. And though the echoes of darkness still lingered, we had learned to live with the knowledge that true evil can be confronted and defeated, even if the scars it leaves never fully heal. Months have passed since we destroyed the box and banished Thalassius, but the memories of those harrowing nights in the mountains still haunt me. Despite the initial relief, there's an unsettling feeling that lingers, a shadow of doubt that the nightmare isn't truly over. Jake and I have tried to return to our lives, but the experience has left an indelible mark on us both. We each deal with the trauma in our own ways. Jake threw himself into work, spending long hours at his job, trying to distract himself from the memories. I, on the other hand, found solace in writing, trying to exorcise the lingering fears by putting them into words. One evening, as I was working on a story, my phone rang. It was Jake. I hadn't heard from him in weeks, and the sound of his voice immediately set off alarm bells in my mind. "Hey, I need to talk to you," he said, his voice tense and urgent. We agreed to meet at a local diner. When I arrived, I found Jake sitting in a corner booth, looking more haggard than ever. His eyes were bloodshot, and his hands trembled as he sipped his coffee. "It's happening again," he said without preamble. "The nightmares, the symbols, they're back." My heart sank. "But we destroyed the box," I protested. "We banished Thalassius. How can this be happening?" Jake shook his head. "I don't know, but I've been seeing things. Shadows moving, whispers in the dark. It feels like Thalassius is still here, lurking, waiting for the right moment to strike." I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. "We need to talk to Eliza," I said. "She might have some answers." We drove to Eliza's house, the oppressive feeling of dread growing stronger with each passing mile. When we arrived, she welcomed us with a grave expression. "I feared this might happen," she said, leading us inside. We explained the return of the symbols and the nightmares, and Eliza listened intently. "The spirit of Thalassius is powerful," she said. "Destroying the anchor weakened it, but it seems there's still a lingering presence. We need to find a way to banish it completely." Eliza suggested a final ritual, one that would cleanse us and the places we had been haunted. It was a risky procedure, but we had no other choice. We couldn't continue living under the shadow of Thalassius. That night, we gathered the necessary items for the ritual. Eliza instructed us to return to the graveyard one last time. The thought of going back filled me with dread, but I knew it was the only way to put an end to this nightmare. The hike to the graveyard felt like a march to the gallows. The fog was thicker than ever, and the air crackled with tension. As we approached the graveyard, the oppressive feeling grew stronger, and I could feel Thalassius's presence closing in. Eliza led us to the grave we had disturbed, and we formed a circle around it. She began chanting in a low, melodic voice, and the air grew colder. The ground trembled, and shadows danced at the edge of our vision. Suddenly, Thalassius's form materialized before us, more solid and menacing than ever. Its eyes burned with rage and hatred. "You cannot escape me," it snarled. "I will consume you all." Ignoring the spirit's threats, Eliza continued her chant. The ground shook violently, and a cold wind whipped around us. I could feel the spirit's anger, a palpable force pressing down on us. With a final, powerful incantation, Eliza raised her hands, and a blinding light erupted from the ground. Thalassius let out a blood-curdling scream, its form disintegrating into the air. The light grew brighter, and the oppressive feeling lifted, replaced by a sense of peace. When the light faded, the graveyard was silent. The air was still, and the fog had cleared. Thalassius was gone, its presence banished for good. We stood in stunned silence, the weight of the past months finally lifting off our shoulders. As we made our way back down the mountain, I felt a sense of closure. The nightmare was finally over. Jake and I could move on with our lives, free from the shadow of Thalassius. In the days that followed, the nightmares stopped, and the feeling of being watched disappeared. Jake and I remained close, our bond strengthened by the shared experience. We knew we had faced true evil and come out the other side stronger. Eliza assured us that Thalassius was truly gone, and for the first time, I believed her. We had confronted our fears and defeated the darkness that had haunted us. And though the memories of those harrowing nights would never fade, we had learned to live with the knowledge that true evil can be confronted and overcome. Life slowly returned to normal. I continued writing, channeling my experiences into my stories, while Jake found solace in his work and hobbies. We both knew that the darkness we had faced was only a glimpse of what lay hidden in the world. but we had proven to ourselves that we could stand against it. The graveyard in the mountains remained a place of fear and mystery, but we had faced its horrors and come out the other side. And though the echoes of darkness still lingered, we had learned that true evil can be defeated, even if the scars it leaves never fully heal. Hey Reddit, I never thought I'd be one of those people who shares their weird, creepy experiences online, but I honestly don't know where else to turn. Maybe writing this out will help me make sense of everything. Anyway, here goes. It all started about 2 weeks ago. My parents decided to take me and my younger brother Tommy on a camping trip to a remote forest. We needed some family bonding time, or at least that's what they said. I wasn't thrilled about it. What 15-year-old wants to spend a weekend without Wi-Fi in the middle of nowhere? But I went along with it, mostly to keep the peace. The first couple of days were uneventful. We hiked, roasted marshmallows, and did all the typical camping stuff. By the third day though, I was bored out of my mind. My parents had taken Tommy to the lake, leaving me alone at the campsite. That's when I decided to do a little exploring on my own. I wandered off, following a narrow trail deeper into the forest. The trees grew denser, and the path became harder to follow, but I kept going. I was hoping to find something interesting, maybe a hidden waterfall or an old treehouse. What I found was something far more sinister. After about an hour of hiking, I stumbled upon an old, abandoned cabin. It looked like it had been there for decades, maybe even longer. The wooden walls were covered in moss, and the windows were boarded up. The door hung on its hinges, creaking slightly in the wind. It gave me the creeps, but my curiosity got the better of me. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The air was stale and musty, filled with the scent of rotting wood and dampness. The floorboards creaked under my weight as I explored the single room. It was empty except for a few broken pieces of furniture and an old, dusty Ouija board sitting in the middle of the floor. Now, I've always been skeptical about supernatural stuff. Ghosts, spirits, demons, they're all just stories to me. But something about that Ouija board felt wrong, like it didn't belong there. Against my better judgment, I picked it up and sat down with it. I figured it might make for a funny story to tell my friends later. I placed my fingers on the planchette and, feeling a bit ridiculous, asked, "Is anyone there?" To my surprise, the planchette moved. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, but it kept moving, slowly spelling out YES. My heart started pounding. I laughed nervously, convinced I was somehow doing it myself. "What's your name?" I asked, trying to sound braver than I felt. The planchette moved again, spelling out SAMUEL. I felt a chill run down my spine. This was getting too weird. I was about to pack it up and leave when the planchette started moving on its own, faster this time. HELPME. I froze. My mind raced. Help me. What the hell did that mean? I tried to lift my fingers off the planchette, but they wouldn't budge. It was like they were glued in place. Panic set in as the planchette continued to move, spelling out another message. DONTLEAVE. I yanked my hands away, my breathing rapid and shallow. I needed to get out of there. I shoved the Ouija board back into my backpack and ran out of the cabin. The forest seemed darker, more oppressive than before. I sprinted down the trail, branches scratching at my arms and face, the sound of my own footsteps echoing in my ears. But no matter how far I ran, I couldn't find my way back to the campsite. The forest felt like it was closing in on me, the trees twisting and turning, the path disappearing beneath my feet. Hours passed, or maybe it was minutes. I couldn't tell. I was lost, hopelessly lost. And then I heard it, a whisper, faint but unmistakable, coming from somewhere in the darkness. "Help me!" I spun around, heart hammering in my chest. There was no one there, just trees and shadows. The voice came again, closer this time. "Don't leave me!" I ran again, stumbling over roots and rocks. my breath coming in ragged gasps. But the whispers followed me, growing louder, more insistent. Please help me. I finally collapsed to the ground, too exhausted to move. The forest was silent now, the whispers gone. I sat there, shivering, trying to make sense of what had happened. I pulled out my phone, hoping to call for help, but there was no signal. I was completely alone. That's when I noticed the Ouija board in my backpack, peeking out from under the flap. I didn't remember putting it there. In fact, I thought I had left it in the cabin. My hands trembled as I pulled it out and set it on the ground. "Who are you?" I whispered, not expecting a response. The planchette moved immediately. Samuel. "Why can't I leave?" I asked, my voice barely audible. Youremine. Terror washed over me. I tried to throw the board away, but it wouldn't leave my hands. It felt like it was a part of me now, like it was grafted to my skin. The whispers started again, louder, more desperate. "Help me. Don't leave me. You're mine." I don't know how long I sat there, paralyzed with fear. Eventually, I must have passed out, because the next thing I remember is waking up to the sound of birds chirping. The forest looked different in the daylight, less menacing, more like the place I had originally set out to explore. But the Ouija board was still there, a constant reminder of the horror I had experienced. I knew I had to find my way back to the campsite, but no matter which direction I walked, I always ended up back at the cabin. It was like the forest itself was keeping me trapped, refusing to let me go. I've been stuck here ever since, trying to survive on berries and whatever else I can find. I've tried calling for help, but no one ever hears me. I've even tried leaving messages for my parents, hoping they'll find them, but it's like I've disappeared from the world entirely. The whispers are constant now, a never-ending chorus of "help me" and "don't leave me" that echoes through my mind. I'm scared, Reddit. I don't know how much longer I can take this. If anyone has any idea how to break this curse, please, I'm begging you, help me. When I woke up, the sun was already high in the sky. For a moment, I almost convinced myself that everything had been a bad dream. But then, I saw the Ouija board lying next to me, and reality came crashing back in. I decided to try one more time to find my way back to the campsite. I carefully marked my starting point by tying pieces of my torn-up shirt to tree branches, making sure I wouldn't get turned around again. But no matter how far I walked, I kept ending up back at the same spot, the cabin. It was like the forest was playing tricks on me, rearranging itself to keep me from escaping. I was starting to lose hope when I saw something strange. There, nailed to a tree, was a piece of old yellowed paper. It had writing on it, but the words were smudged and faded. I could barely make out a few letters, but one word stood out clearly. "Run." My heart pounded in my chest. Someone else had been here, and they had left a warning. But who? And where were they now? I took the paper and stuffed it into my pocket. I didn't need to be told twice. I turned and ran as fast as I could, not caring which direction I went. I just needed to get away from that cabin. As I ran, the forest seemed to close in around me, the trees pressing in tighter and tighter. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but I couldn't stop. I had to keep moving. The whispers started again, louder this time, more urgent. "Help me, don't leave me, you're mine." I stumbled and fell, scraping my hands and knees on the rough ground. When I looked up, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Standing in front of me was a figure, tall and thin, with hollow eyes and a twisted grin. It looked like a man, but there was something off about it, like it wasn't quite human. "Samuel," I whispered, my voice trembling. The figure nodded, its grin widening. I tried to back away, but my legs wouldn't move. It felt like I was rooted to the spot. Paralyzed with fear, the figure took a step closer, and I could see its features more clearly. Its skin was pale and stretched tight over its bones, and its eyes were dark, empty pits. "You're mine," it said, its voice a low, guttural rasp. I finally managed to break free from my paralysis and scrambled to my feet. I ran again, not daring to look back. The whispers followed me, growing louder and more frantic with each step. "Help me! Don't leave me! You're mine. I don't know how long I ran. It felt like hours. My body was screaming in protest, but I couldn't stop. Not until I was sure I was far away from that thing, whatever it was. When I finally collapsed from exhaustion, I found myself in a small clearing. The cabin was nowhere in sight, and for the first time, I felt a glimmer of hope. I took a moment to catch my breath, trying to calm my racing heart, but as soon as I did, I heard it again, the whispering. It was faint at first, barely audible, but it grew louder and more insistent with each passing second. Help me, don't leave me, you're mine. I looked around, but there was no one there, just trees and shadows. I was alone, completely and utterly alone. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. I was trapped in this nightmare, with no way out. Desperation took over, and I did the only thing I could think of. I pulled out the Ouija board and placed it on the ground. Maybe, just maybe, I could find some answers. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The planchette moved slowly, spelling out the same name as before, Samuel. "Why are you doing this to me?" I demanded, my fear giving way to anger. The planchette moved again, spelling out a new message, HELPME. "Help you? How?" I asked, frustration creeping into my voice. The planchette moved faster this time, almost frantically. FINDME. "Find you? Where?" I shouted, my patience wearing thin. The planchette spelled out one final message before stopping abruptly. THECABIN. I stared at the board, my mind racing. The cabin. It always came back to the cabin. I had no choice. If I wanted to end this, I had to go back. I had to find Samuel and figure out what he wanted. With a heavy heart, I picked up the Ouija board and started walking. The forest seemed to guide me this time, the trees parting to reveal a clear path. It didn't take long before I was standing in front of the cabin again. The sight of it sent a shiver down my spine, but I forced myself to take a step forward, then another. Inside, the cabin was just as I had left it. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and the shadows seemed to dance on the walls. I placed the Ouija board on the floor and sat down, my hands trembling. "Samuel!" I called out, my voice echoing in the empty room. "I'm here! What do you want from me?" The planchette moved on its own, faster than ever before. FINDMYBODY. My breath caught in my throat. His body? I didn't understand, but I knew I had to follow through. I searched the cabin, tearing up floorboards and checking every nook and cranny. Finally, in a small hidden compartment under the floor, I found it, a skeleton, twisted and broken, with scraps of clothing still clinging to the bones. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me, but I forced myself to stay calm. This was Samuel. This was what he wanted me to find. I carefully lifted the skeleton out of its hiding place and laid it on the floor. "What now?" I whispered, my voice shaking. The planchette moved one last time. BURYME. I understood. I had to give him a proper burial. I carried the skeleton outside and found a spot near the cabin. Using my bare hands, I dug a shallow grave and gently placed the bones inside. I covered them with dirt and marked the spot with a small pile of stones. As I finished, I felt a strange sense of peace wash over me. The whispers stopped, and the forest seemed to grow lighter, less oppressive. I knew I had done the right thing. But as I turned to leave, I saw him again, the figure with the hollow eyes and twisted grin. Samuel. He was standing at the edge of the clearing, watching me. "Thank you," he said, his voice no longer a whisper, but clear and strong. I nodded, too exhausted to speak. He gave me one last smile before fading into the trees, leaving me alone in the clearing. I don't know what's going to happen next, Reddit. I don't know if I'll ever find my way out of this forest, or if I'll be trapped here forever. But for now at least, the whispers are gone. And that's enough. After I buried Samuel, I felt a strange sense of peace. The whispers had stopped, and for the first time in days, I thought I might actually have a chance to find my way back to the campsite. I spent the rest of the day wandering the forest, marking my path as best as I could. But as night fell, the forest became an entirely different place. The darkness seemed to swallow the light, making it impossible to see more than a few feet in front of me. I tried to set up a makeshift camp, but sleep was elusive. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig set my nerves on edge. I felt like I was being watched, but whenever I turned to look, there was nothing there. It was around midnight when the whispers started again. At first they were faint, almost indistinguishable from the wind, but they grew louder, more insistent, until they were all I could hear. "Help me! Don't leave me! You're mine!" My heart pounded in my chest as I scrambled to my feet. I clutched the Ouija board, hoping it might offer some answers, but it remained still and silent. I had no choice but to follow the whispers, hoping they would lead me to something, anything, that could help. I stumbled through the darkness, my flashlight casting long, eerie shadows on the trees. The whispers grew louder, more desperate, until they were a cacophony in my ears. And then suddenly, they stopped. I found myself standing in front of a massive tree, its gnarled branches stretching out like twisted arms. At its base was a small, weathered headstone, barely visible in the dim light. I knelt down, brushing away the dirt and leaves to read the inscription. "Here lies Samuel. May he find peace in death." A chill ran down my spine. This was Samuel's grave, but it didn't make any sense. I had just buried his bones by the cabin. How could this be here? My mind raced, trying to make sense of it all. That's when I heard it, a low, guttural growl coming from behind me. I spun around, my flashlight sweeping the area, but saw nothing. The growl came again, closer this time, and I realized with a sinking feeling that I wasn't alone. A pair of glowing eyes appeared in the darkness, followed by another, and then another. I was surrounded. The creatures stepped into the light, and I felt my blood run cold. They were wolves, but not like any I had ever seen. Their fur was matted and patchy. Their eyes glowed with an unnatural light, and their teeth were long and sharp. I backed away slowly, my heart hammering in my chest. The wolves circled me, growling and snapping their jaws. I knew I couldn't outrun them, but I had to try. I turned and ran, my legs pumping furiously, but the wolves were faster. They nipped at my heels, driving me toward the massive tree. I pressed my back against the trunk, clutching the Ouija board to my chest. The wolves advanced, their eyes glowing with a malevolent light. I was trapped, with nowhere to go. "Help me!" I whispered, my voice trembling. The whispers returned, louder than ever. "Don't leave me! You're mine!" I closed my eyes, bracing myself for the end. But instead of the searing pain of fangs sinking into my flesh, I felt a rush of cold air. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, until they were a deafening roar. And then, silence. I opened my eyes to find the wolves gone, the forest eerily still. The only sound was the pounding of my own heart. I looked around, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The headstone was gone, the tree just another part of the forest. I fell to my knees, exhausted and confused. The Ouija board slipped from my grasp, landing in the dirt with a soft thud. I stared at it, my mind racing. What did Samuel want from me? Why couldn't I leave this place? As if in response, the planchette began to move on its own. DARKNESSCOMING. My breath caught in my throat. Darkness coming. What did that mean? I watched in horror as the planchette continued to spell out another message. NOESCAPE. I felt a wave of despair wash over me. No escape. I was trapped in this nightmare, with no way out. The whispers started again, softer this time, but no less insistent. "Help me. Don't leave me. You're mine." I knew I had to do something, anything, to break free. I picked up the Ouija board and started walking, my steps slow and deliberate. I had to find a way out of this forest to escape the darkness that was closing in around me. But with each step, the forest seemed to grow darker, more oppressive. The trees loomed overhead, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. The whispers grew louder, more desperate, until they were all I could hear. "Help me! Don't leave me! You're mine!" I don't know how long I walked. Time seemed to lose all meaning in that endless night. I stumbled and fell, picked myself up, and kept moving. The darkness pressed in on me from all sides, suffocating and relentless. And then I saw it, a light, faint and flickering, in the distance. My heart leapt with hope as I stumbled toward it, praying it was a way out. As I drew closer, I realized it was a campfire, its flames casting a warm glow on the trees. I rushed forward, my spirits lifting, but as I stepped into the light, my hope turned to horror. Sitting around the campfire were figures, their faces twisted and distorted, their eyes empty sockets. They turned to look at me, their mouths stretching into grotesque smiles. "Welcome," one of them said, its voice a raspy whisper. "We've been waiting for you." I stumbled back, my mind reeling. What was this place? Who were these people? The whispers started again, louder than ever. "Help me! Don't leave me! You're mine!" I fell to my knees, my body trembling with fear. The figures closed in around me, their hands reaching out, their whispers filling my ears. "Help me! Don't leave me! You're mine!" I knew then that there was no escape. I was trapped in this nightmare, with no way out. The darkness had claimed me, and there was nothing I could do. When those figures closed in around me, their empty eyes boring into my soul, I thought it was the end. But then, something strange happened. The whispers grew louder, more frantic, and the figures recoiled as if they were in pain. I took the opportunity to scramble away, my heart pounding in my chest. I ran until my legs gave out, collapsing in a heap on the forest floor. The whispers had quieted to a dull murmur, and I took a moment to catch my breath. That's when I realized I was clutching the Ouija board to my chest, the planchette still moving under my fingers. "Findthebook," it spelled out. A book? What book? My mind raced as I tried to make sense of this new information. I had already found Samuel's body and buried it, so what else could there be? I had no choice but to follow the board's instructions. I got to my feet, my body aching with exhaustion, and started walking again. The forest seemed to shift around me, the trees twisting and turning in the darkness. I kept my eyes peeled for any sign of a book, but the forest offered no clues. Hours passed, or maybe it was minutes. It was impossible to tell. My flashlight flickered and died, leaving me in total darkness. I stumbled and fell, scraping my hands and knees on the rough ground. As I lay there, struggling to catch my breath, I heard it again. "Help me! Don't leave me! You're mine!" The whispers were louder than ever, filling my mind with a sense of dread. I pushed myself to my feet and kept moving, guided only by the faint glow of the Ouija board. I didn't know where I was going, but I had to keep moving. Finally, I saw it. A faint light in the distance. I stumbled toward it, my hope renewed. As I drew closer, I realized it was another cabin, smaller and more dilapidated than the first. The door hung open, creaking in the wind. I stepped inside, my heart pounding in my chest. The cabin was empty, save for a single table in the center of the room. On the table was an old, leather-bound book, its pages yellowed with age. I approached it cautiously, my fingers trembling as I reached out to touch it. As soon as my fingers brushed the cover, the whispers stopped. The silence was deafening, and I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. I opened the book, my eyes scanning the faded text. It was written in a language I didn't understand, but I could make out a few words here and there. One word stood out: Samuel. I turned the pages, my hands shaking. The book seemed to tell the story of a young boy named Samuel, who had been lost in the forest many years ago. According to the book, he had been searching for something powerful and dangerous. As I read, I felt a cold presence behind me. I turned to see Samuel standing there, his eyes filled with sadness. "You found the book," he said, his voice a soft whisper. I nodded, too stunned to speak. "You need to read the final passage," he continued. "It will set me free." I turned to the last page, my eyes scanning the text. The words seemed to blur and shift on the page, but I forced myself to focus. As I read the final passage aloud, a strange feeling came over me. The air grew cold, and I felt a sense of heaviness in my chest. "Release me from this curse," I whispered, my voice trembling. Let me find peace." As soon as the words left my lips, a gust of wind swept through the cabin, extinguishing the light. I felt a strange sensation, like a weight lifting off my shoulders. The darkness seemed to recede, and I saw Samuel's face light up with relief. "Thank you," he said, his voice barely audible, and then he was gone, disappearing into the shadows. I stood there in the darkness, my mind racing. Had I really just set Samuel free? Was the curse finally broken? I didn't know what to think, but I knew I had to get out of the forest. I stepped outside the cabin, the night air cool against my skin. The forest seemed different now, less menacing, more like the place I had originally set out to explore. I took a deep breath and started walking, hoping to find my way back to the campsite. But as I walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still wrong. The whispers were gone, but the forest seemed to close in around me, the trees pressing in tighter and tighter. I stumbled and fell, my body trembling with exhaustion. That's when I saw it, a light in the distance. My heart leapt with hope as I stumbled toward it, praying it was a way out. But as I drew closer, I realized it was the same campfire I had seen before, the same twisted figures sitting around it. "Welcome back," one of them said, its voice a raspy whisper. I fell to my knees, my mind reeling. What was this place? Why couldn't I escape? The whispers started again, louder than ever. "Help me, don't leave me, you're mine." I knew then that there was no escape. I was trapped in this nightmare, with no way out. The darkness had claimed me, and there was nothing I could do. But as I sat there, a strange thought crossed my mind. What if the book held more answers? What if there was something I'd missed? I pulled the book from my backpack and opened it, my eyes scanning the pages for any clue. And there, in the margins of the final page, I saw it. A small handwritten note. It was barely legible, but I could make out the words. "To break the curse, you must find the source of the darkness. Only then will you be free." My heart pounded in my chest as I read the words over and over. The source of the darkness. I didn't know what it meant, but I knew I had to find it. With renewed determination, I stood up and started walking. The forest seemed to guide me this time, the trees parting to reveal a clear path. I followed it, my steps slow and deliberate, until I found myself standing in front of a massive ancient tree. The tree was unlike any I had ever seen. Its branches twisted and turned, reaching out like skeletal fingers. At its base was a small weathered headstone, the same one I had seen before. I knelt down, brushing away the dirt and leaves to read the inscription. "Here lies the source of the darkness. May it never be released." My breath caught in my throat. This was it. This was what I had been searching for. I had to find a way to destroy it, to break the curse once and for all. I picked up a rock and started to dig, my hands trembling with fear and determination. The ground was hard and unyielding, but I kept at it, driven by a desperate need to be free. Finally, I hit something solid. I cleared away the dirt to reveal a small black box, its surface etched with strange symbols. I lifted it out of the ground, my heart pounding in my chest. The whispers grew louder, more frantic, as I opened the box. Inside was a small black stone, pulsing with a dark energy. I knew then that this was the source of the darkness, the thing that had trapped me in this nightmare. I had to destroy it. With a deep breath, I raised the stone above my head and brought it crashing down on the rock. There was a blinding flash of light, and I felt a surge of energy coursing through my body. The darkness seemed to implode, collapsing in on itself, and I was thrown backward by the force of it. When I opened my eyes, I was lying on the forest floor, the sun shining down on me. The whispers were gone, and the forest seemed different, peaceful, almost serene. I got to my feet, my body aching but my mind clear. I had done it. I had broken the curse. With a sense of relief, I started walking, hoping to find my way back to the campsite. And this time, the forest seemed to guide me, the path clear and unobstructed. As I walked, I felt a strange sense of peace wash over me. The darkness was gone, and I was free. But I knew I would never forget the things I had seen, the horrors I had faced. The forest had changed me, and I would never be the same. But at least I was free. After destroying the stone and breaking the curse, I felt a strange calm wash over me. The forest no longer seemed hostile. The oppressive darkness had lifted. I started walking, the path ahead clear for the first time in days. It was like the forest itself was guiding me back to safety. As I walked, I tried to piece together everything that had happened: Samuel's spirit, the Ouija board, the whispers, the creatures. They all felt like fragments of a terrible dream. But the memories were too vivid, too real to dismiss. It didn't take long before I stumbled upon a familiar sight, the campsite. My parents' tent was still there, untouched. The fire pit was cold, but it looked like they had been there recently. My heart pounded as I called out for them. "Mum! Dad! Tommy!" For a few agonizing moments, there was only silence. Then I heard it. Footsteps, rushing toward me. My mum emerged from the trees, her face pale and strained with worry. She ran to me, wrapping me in a tight embrace. "Oh my God, Jake, we've been looking for you everywhere," she cried, tears streaming down her face. My dad and Tommy soon followed, their expressions a mix of relief and confusion. They had been searching for me for days, fearing the worst. I tried to explain what had happened, but the words felt inadequate. How could I make them understand the horrors I had faced? We packed up the campsite and made our way back to civilization. The drive home was a blur, my mind still reeling from the ordeal. I spent most of the time staring out the window, trying to make sense of it all. When we finally got home, I collapsed into bed, hoping that sleep would bring some semblance of peace, but the nightmares returned, haunting my every moment of rest. Samuel's face, the twisted figures, the whispers, they were all there, lurking in the shadows of my mind. Days turned into weeks, and the nightmares didn't fade. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still wrong, that the darkness hadn't truly left me. My parents grew increasingly worried, urging me to see a therapist. I finally agreed, hoping that talking to someone might help. The therapist was kind, but skeptical. She listened patiently as I recounted my experiences, but it was clear she thought it was all in my head. "Trauma can manifest in strange ways," she said, jotting down notes on her clipboard. "Sometimes our minds create stories to make sense of what we've been through." I wanted to believe her, to accept that it was all just a figment of my imagination. But deep down, I knew the truth. The forest, the Ouija board, Samuel, it was all real, and it had left a mark on me that wouldn't easily fade. One night, I woke up in a cold sweat, the whispers echoing in my ears. "Help me! Don't leave me! You're mine!" I sat up, heart racing, and saw it, the Ouija board sitting on my desk, the planchette moving on its own. Terror gripped me as I realized the darkness had followed me home. I grabbed the board and ran outside, determined to rid myself of it once and for all. I dug a hole in the backyard and buried the board, hoping that would be enough to break its hold on me. For a while, things seemed to get better. The nightmares became less frequent, and the whispers faded to a distant memory. I started to feel like myself again, slowly piecing my life back together. But then, one night, the whispers returned. Faint at first, but growing louder, more insistent. "Help me! Don't leave me! You're mine!" I bolted upright in bed, fear clawing at my chest. I knew I had to confront whatever was haunting me, to face it head on. I went back to the forest, retracing my steps to the cabin. The journey was quicker this time, the path familiar. When I reached the cabin, it looked the same as before, its weathered walls standing silent and foreboding. I stepped inside, the air thick with the scent of decay. The Ouija board was there, somehow dug up and returned. My hands trembled as I placed my fingers on the planchette. "What do you want from me?" I whispered, my voice shaking. The planchette moved, spelling out a message that sent chills down my spine. Neverleave. I realized then that I would never truly escape. The darkness had become a part of me, entwined with my very soul. The forest, the cabin, the whispers, they would always be with me, lurking in the shadows of my mind. With a heavy heart, I left the cabin and made my way back home. I knew I couldn't change what had happened, but I could learn to live with it, to accept that the darkness was now a part of my story. So here I am, sharing my tale with you, hoping that by putting it into words, I can find some semblance of peace. I don't know what the future holds, but I've learned to face my fears, to confront the darkness head on. Thank you for reading, for listening to my story. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that we can't always escape our past, but we can learn to live with it. And maybe, just maybe, we can find a way to move forward. Stay safe, Reddit. And if you ever find yourself lost in the forest, remember my story. Trust your instincts and don't let the darkness consume you.